The devil awakens.
Maximus wrests his life from the underworld.
Hey boy, what in the world are you doing here?
He was elated with his escape.
I wanted out.
I set out now in a box upon the sea. I lived alone in the woods, a mile from any neighbor, in a house I built myself, on the shore of Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, and earned my living by the labor of my hands only. I lived there 2 years and 2 months, and at present I am a sojourner in civilized life again. Now, I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my hearers if very peculiar inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life, what I got to eat, if I did not feel lonesome, if I was not afraid, and the like. So I will therefore ask those of my auditors who feel no particular interest in me to pardon me if I undertake to answer some of these questions. I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew as well. Unfortunately, I am confined to this theme by the narrowness of my experience. And moreover, I, on my side, require of every speaker or writer, first or last, a simple and sincere account of his own life, and not merely what he has heard of other men's lives. Perhaps this lecture on economy is more particularly addressed to poor students, and as for the rest of you, I trust that you will accept such portions as apply to you, and that none will stretch the seams in putting on the coat, for it may do good service on him whom it fits. I see young men, my townsmen, whose misfortune it is to have inherited farms, houses, barns, cattle, and farming tools, for these are more easily acquired than got rid of. Better if they had been born in the open pasture and suckled by a wolf, that they might have seen with clearer eyes what field they were called to labor in. Who made them serfs of the soil? How many a poor immortal soul have I met, well nigh crushed and smothered under its load, creeping down the road of life, pushing before it a barn of 75 feet by 40. Its Aegean stables never cleansed, and 100 acres of land, tillage, mowing, pasture, and woodlot. The portion less, who struggle with no such unnecessary inherited encumbrances, find it labor enough to subdue and cultivate a few cubic feet of flesh. But men labor under a mistake. The better part of the man is soon plowed into the soil for compost, and by a seeming fate, commonly called necessity, they are employed, as it says in an old book, laying up treasures which moth and rust will corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. It is a fool's life, so they will find out when they get to the end of it, if not before. Most men, even in this comparatively free country, through mere ignorance and mistake, are so occupied with the factitious cares and superfluously coarse labors of life that its finer fruits cannot be plucked by them. The finest qualities of our nature, like the bloom of fruits, can be preserved only by the most delicate handling. Yet we do not treat ourselves nor one another thus tenderly. Some of you, I know, are poor, find it hard to live, are sometimes, as it were, grasping for breath. I have no doubt that some of you are unable to pay for all the dinners that you have actually eaten, or for the coats and shoes which are fast wearing or are already worn, and have come to this lecture to spend borrowed or stolen time robbing your creditors of an hour. It is evident what mean and sneaking lives many of you live, for my sight has been wedded by experience, always promising to pay tomorrow and dying today insolvent, seeking to curry favor, contracting yourselves into a nutshell of civility that you may persuade your neighbor to let you make his shoes, or his hat, or his coat, or his carriage, or import his groceries for him, making yourselves sick, that you may lay up something against a sick day, something to be tucked away in an old chest or more safely in the brick bank. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. And from the desperate city, you go into the desperate country, and you have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play for them, for this always comes after work. When we consider what, to use the words of the Catechism, is the chief end of man and what are the true necessaries and means of life, it appears as if men had deliberately chosen the common mode of living because they preferred it to any other. Yet they honestly think there is no choice left. No way of thinking or doing, however ancient, can be trusted without proof. Well, one farmer says to me, "Henry, you cannot live on vegetable food alone, for it furnishes nothing to make bones with." Walking all the while, he talks behind his oxen, which with vegetable-made bones jerk him and his lumbering plow along in spite of every obstacle. Let us consider for a moment what most of the trouble and anxiety which I have referred to is about, and how much it is necessary that we be troubled. By the words necessary of life, I mean whatever of all that man obtains by his own exertions has been from the beginning so important to human life that few, if any, ever attempt to do without. None of the brute creation requires more than food and shelter. The necessaries of life for man in this climate may, accurately enough, be distributed under the several heads of food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. For not till we have secured these are we prepared to entertain the true problems of life with freedom and a prospect of success. Man has invented not only houses, but clothes and cooked food. And by proper shelter and clothing, we legitimately retain our internal heat. And if, as Dr. Liebig claims, man's body is a stove, and food the fuel which keeps up the internal combustion, then shelter and clothing only serve to retain the heat thus generated and absorbed. The grand necessity then for our bodies is to keep warm, to keep the vital heat in us. And the summer, in some climates, makes possible to man a sort of Elysian life. Fuel, except to cook his food, is then unnecessary. The sun is his fire, and many of the fruits are sufficiently cooked by its rays, and clothing and shelter are wholly or half unnecessary. Consider first how slight a shelter is absolutely necessary. Now, I have seen Penobscot Indians in my town living in tents of thin cotton cloth while the snow was nearly a foot deep around them, and I thought that they would be glad to have it deeper to keep out the wind. I used to see a large box by the railroad, 6 feet long by 3 feet wide, in which the Irish laborers locked up their tools at night. And it suggested to me that every man who was hard pushed might get such a one for $1. And having bored a few auger holes in it, at least to admit the air at least, get into it when it rained and at night, and hook down the lid, and so have freedom in his love and in his soul. Now, this did not appear to be the worst, nor by any means a despicable alternative. Why, you could sit up as late as you pleased, and whenever you got up, go abroad without any landlord dogging you for rent. Many a man is harassed to death to pay the rent of a larger and more luxurious box, who would not have been frozen to death in such a box as this. No, I am far from jesting. Economy is a subject which admits of being treated with levity, but it cannot so easily be disposed of in the savage state. In the savage state, every family owns a shelter as good as the best, and sufficient for its coarser and simpler wants. But I think that I speak within bounds when I say that, though the birds of the air have their nests, and the foxes their holes, and the savages their wigwams, in modern civilized society, not more than 1/2 of our families own a shelter. If it is asserted that civilization is a real advance in the condition of man, and I think it is, though only the wise improve their advantages, then it must be shown that it has produced better dwellings without making them more costly. And the cost of a thing is the amount of what I call life, which is required to be exchanged for it, immediately or in the long run. An average house in my neighborhood costs perhaps $800. And to lay up his sum, it will take from 10 to 15 years of the laborer's life, so that he must spend more than half his life commonly before his wigwam will be earned. When I consider my neighbors, the farmers of Concord, who are at least as well off as the other classes, I find that for the most part they have been toiling 20, 30, or 40 years, that they may become the real owners of their farms. The man who is actually paid for his farm with labor on it, so rare that every neighbor can point to him, I doubt if there are 3 such men in Concord. Now, at the present day and in this country, as I find by my own experience, a few implements, a knife, an axe, a spade, a wheelbarrow, and for the studious, lamplight, stationery, and access to books rank next to necessaries, and can all be obtained at a trifling cost. And most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. And with respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live by its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. How can a man be a philosopher and not maintain his vital heat by better methods than other men? When he has obtained these things which are necessary to life, there is another alternative than to obtain the superfluities, and that is to adventure on life itself, his vacation from humbler toil having commenced. If I should attempt to tell how I have desired to spend my life in years past, I would say that in any weather, at any hour of the day or night, I have been anxious to improve the nick of time and to notch it on my walking stick too, to stand on the meeting of 2 eternities, the past and the future, which is precisely the present moment. I long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove, and am still on their trail. I seek to anticipate not the sunrise and the dawn merely, but if possible, nature herself. How many mornings, summer and winter, before yet any neighbor was stirring about his business, have I been about mine? So many autumn, and winter days spent outside the town, trying to hear what was in the wind, to hear and carry it express. I well nigh sunk all my capital in it, and lost my own breath in the bargain. At other times, watching from some cliff or tree to telegraph my new arrival, or waiting at evening on the hilltops for the sky to fall that I might catch something, Manna Wise. For a long time, I was a reporter to a journal, The Dial, of no very wide circulation, whose editor, Margaret Fuller, has never yet seen fit to print the bulk of my contributions. And as is too common with writers, I got only my labor for my pains. However, in this case, my pains were their own reward. For many years, I was a self-appointed inspector of snowstorms and rainstorms, and did my duty faithfully, surveyor, if not of highways, then of forest paths and cross-lot routes, keeping them open and ravines bridged and passable at all seasons, where the public heel had testified to their utility. I have looked after the wild stock of the town, which gave even a faithful herdsman a good deal of trouble by leaping fences. I have watered the red huckleberry, the sand cherry, the red pine and black ash, the white grape and the yellow violet, which might have withered else in dry seasons. In short, I went on thus for a long time, and I may say it without boasting, faithfully minding my own business, till it became more and more evident that my townsmen would not, after all, admit me into the list of town offices, nor make my place a sinecure with a moderate allowance. My accounts, which I can swear to have kept faithfully, have indeed never got audited, still less accepted, still less paid and settled. However, I have not set my heart on that. Finding that my fellow citizens were not likely to offer me any room in the courthouse or any curacy or living anywhere else, but that I must shift for myself, I turned my face more exclusively than ever to the woods, where I was better known. And my purpose in going to Walden Pond was not to live, nor to live dearly there, but to transact some private business with the fewest obstacles. So near the end of March, 1845, I borrowed an axe and went down to the woods by Walden Pond and began to cut down some tall, arrowy white pine for timber. Now, it is difficult to begin without borrowing, but perhaps it is the most generous course thus to permit your fellow men to have an interest in your enterprise. Or the owner of the axe, as he released his hold on it, said, "It was the apple of his eye." But I returned it sharper than I received it. And it was a pleasant hillside where I worked, covered with pine woods, through which I looked out onto the pond, and a small field in the woods where pines and hickories were springing up. The ice in the pond was not yet dissolved, but I heard the lark and the pewee and other birds already come to commence another year among us. These were pleasant spring days, in which the winter of man's discontent was thawing as well as the earth, and the life that had lain torpid began to stretch itself. Well, one day when my axe had come off, and I'd cut a green hickory for a wedge, driving it with a stone, and had placed the whole of it to soak in a pond hole in order to swell the wood, I saw a striped snake slither into the water. And he lay on the bottom for more than a quarter of an hour without moving. And I thought perhaps it was because he had not yet fairly come out of his torpid state, and that for a like reason men remain in their present low and primitive condition. But if we should feel the spring of springs arising in us, we might of necessity rise to a higher and more ethereal life. So I went on for some days, cutting and hewing timber, studs and rafters, all with my narrow axe, not having many communicable nor scholar-like thoughts, singing to myself. Men say they know many things, but lo, they have taken wings. The arts and sciences and 1,000 appliances, the wind that blows is all that anybody knows. My days in the woods were not very long ones. Before I was done, I was more the friend than the foe of the pine tree, though I had cut down some of them. And by the middle of April, my house was framed and ready for the raising. Now, I had already bought the shanty of James Collins, an Irishman who worked on the Fitchburg Railroad for boards. James Collins's shanty was an uncommonly fine one. When I called to see if he was not at home, I walked about the outside at first, unobserved from within. The window was so deep and high. It was of small dimensions with a peaked cottage roof, and not much else to be seen, the dirt being raised 5 feet all around it as if it were a compost heap. And the roof was the soundest part, though a good deal warped and made brittle by the sun. Door sill there was none, but a perennial passage for the hens under the door board. Mrs. C. came to the door and asked me to view it from inside. The hens were driven in by my approach. It was dark. It had a dirt floor for the most part, dank, clammy, only here a board and there a board, which would not bear removal. She lighted a lamp to show me the inside of the roof and the walls, warning me not to step into the cellar, a sort of dust hole 2 feet deep. In her own words, there were good boards overhead, good boards all around, and a good window, till the cat passed out that way lately. There was a stove, a bed, a place to sit, and an infant in the house where it was born. A silk parasol, gilt-framed looking-glass, and a patent-new coffee mill nailed to an oak sapling, all told. The bargain was soon concluded, for James had in the meanwhile returned, I to pay $4.25 tonight, he to vacate at 5 tomorrow morning, selling to nobody else meanwhile. I to take possession at 6. At 6 I passed he and his family on the road. One large bundle held their all, bed, coffee mill, looking-glass, hens, all but the cat. She took to the woods and became a wild cat, and was later trod in a trap set for woodchucks, and so became a dead cat. I took down this dwelling the same morning, drawing the nails, and removed it to the pond side by small cartloads, spreading the boards on the grass, there to bleach and wrap back again in the sun. And I dug my cellar in the side of a hill sloping to the south, where a woodchuck had formerly dug his burrow, down through sumac and blackberry roots, 6 feet square by 7 feet deep, to a fine sand where potatoes would not freeze in any winter. It was but 2 hours' work, and I took particular pleasure in this breaking of ground, for under the most splendid house in the city is still to be found the cellar, where they store their roots as of old. The house was still but a sort of porch at the entrance of a burrow, the owner of which I had yet to encounter. At length, in the beginning of May, with the help of some of my acquaintances, rather to improve so good an occasion for neighborliness than from any necessity, I set up the frame of my house. No man was ever honored in the character of his raisers than I. They are destined, I trust, to assist in the raising of loftier structures one day. I began to occupy my house on the 4th of July, as soon as it was boarded and roofed, for the boards were feather-edged and lapped, so it was impervious to rain. But before the boarding, I laid a foundation of a chimney at one end, bringing 2 cartloads of stones up the hill from the pond in my arms. And before winter, I built a chimney and shingled the sides of my house. I had thus a tight shingled and plastered house, 10 feet wide by 15 feet long, with 8-foot posts, with a garret and a closet, a large window on each side, 2 trap doors, 1 door at the end, and a brick fireplace opposite. The exact cost of my house, paying the usual price for such materials as I used, but not counting the labor, all of which was done by me, was as follows. And I give these details because very few are able to tell exactly what their houses cost, and fewer still, if any, can separate the cost of the various materials which compose them. Boards, $8 3 1/3 cents, mostly shanty boards. Refuge shingles for roof and sides, $4. Laths, $1.25. 2 second-hand windows with glass, $2.43. 1,000 old brick, $4. 2 casks of lime, $2.40. Mantle tree iron, 15 cents. Nails, $3.90. Hinges and screws, 14. Latch, 10. Chalk, 1. Transportation, $1.40. I carried most of it on my back. In all, $28, 12 1/2 cents. These are all the materials excepting the timber, stones, and sand, which I claimed by squatter's rights. And I have also a small woodshed adjoining, made chiefly of the stuff which was left after building the house. I thus found that a student who wishes for a shelter can obtain one for a lifetime at an expense but greater than the rent which he now pays annually. Now, if I seem to boast more than is becoming, my excuse is that I brag for all humanity rather than for myself, and my shortcomings and inconsistencies do not affect the truth of my statement. At Cambridge College, the mere rent of a student's room, which is only a little larger than my own, is $30 each year, though the corporation has the advantage of building 32 of these side by side and under one roof, and the occupant suffers the inconvenience of many and noisy neighbors. Before I had finished my house, wishing to earn some $10 or $12 by some honest and agreeable method, I planted about 2 acres of beans, potatoes, corn, peas, and turnips. The whole lot contains 11 acres, mostly growing up to pines and hickories, and was sold the preceding season to Ralph Waldo Emerson for $8.08 an acre. One farmer said to me that it was good for nothing but to raise cheeping squirrels on. Well, I put no manure whatever on the land, not being the owner, but merely a squatter, and not expecting to cultivate so much again. And I did not quite hoe it all at once. But my farm outgoes for the first season were, for implements, seed, work, $14.72.5. I got 12 bushels of beans, 18 bushels of potatoes, some peas, and sweet corn. The yellow corn and turnips were too late to come to anything, and my whole income from the farm was $23.44, and deducting the outgoes, it left me $8.71.5. Now, considering the importance of a man's soul and of today, notwithstanding the short time occupied by my experiment, nay, partly even because of its transient character, I believe that that was doing better than any farmer in Concord did that year. And the next year I did still better, for I spaded up all the land which I required, about 1/3 of an acre, and I learned that if one would live simply and eat only the crop he raised, and raise no more than he ate, and not exchange it for an insufficient quantity of more luxurious and expensive things, that he need only cultivate a few rods of ground. I was more independent than any farmer in Concord, for I was not anchored to a house or a farm, but could follow the bent of my genius, which is a very crooked one, every moment. Besides being better off than they already, if my house had been burned or my crops had failed, I should have been nearly as well off as before. I am wont to think that men are not so much the keepers of herds as herds are the keepers of men. I love a broad margin to my life. By surveying, carpentry, and day labor of various other kinds, I had earned $13.34. The expensive food for those 8 months, July 4th to March 1st, cost $8.74 all told. Now I address myself to those of you who have a living to get. Nothing was given me which I have not rendered some account. My food alone cost me in money about 27 cents a week. It was for nearly 2 years rye and Indian meal without yeast, potatoes, rice, a very little salt pork, molasses and salt, and my drink water. Or it was fit that I should live on rice, mainly, who loved so well the philosophy of India. I had learned from my 2 years' experience that it would cost incredibly little trouble to obtain one's necessary food, even in this latitude, that a man may use as simple a diet as the animals and yet retain health and strength. Now, the listener will perceive that I am treating the subject rather from an economic rather than a dietetic point of view, and he will not venture to put my abstemiousness to the test unless he has a well-stocked larder. My furniture. Part of which I made myself, cost me nothing of which I have not rendered an account, consisted of a bed, a table, a desk, 3 chairs, a looking glass, 3 inches in diameter, a pair of tongs and andirons, a kettle, a skillet, and a frying pan, a dipper, a wash bowl, 2 knives and forks, 3 plates, 1 cup, 1 spoon, a jug for oil, a jug for molasses, and a japanned lamp. Oh, none is so poor that he need sit on a pumpkin. That is sheer shiftlessness. There's plenty of such chairs as I like best in the village garrets to be had for the taking away. Furniture. Thank God I can sit and stand without the aid of a furniture warehouse. What man but a philosopher would not be ashamed to see his furniture packed in a cart and going up country, exposed to the light of heaven and the eyes of men? A beggarly account of empty boxes. Oh, that is Spaulding's furniture. I could never tell from inspecting such a load whether it belonged to a so-called rich man or a poor one. The owner always seemed poverty-stricken. Well, each load looked as if it contained the contents of a dozen shanties. And if one shanty is poor, this is a dozen times as poor. Pray, for what do we move ever but to get rid of our furniture, our exuvia, at last to go from this world to another, newly furnished, and leave this to be burned? It is the same as if all these traps were buckled to a man's belt, and he could not move without dragging them, dragging his own trap. Oh, he was a lucky fox that left his tail in the trap, and the muskrat will gnaw off his third leg to be free. I cannot but feel compassion when I hear some trig, compact-looking man, seemingly free, all girded and ready, speaking of his furniture, as whether it is insured or not. But what shall I do with my furniture? Well, now our gay butterfly is entangled in a spider's web. Now I have met an immigrant tottering under a bundle which contained his all, looking like an enormous wen which had grown out of the nape of his neck. And I have pitied him, not because he had so little, but because he had all that to carry. If I have to drag my trap, I will take care that it will be a light one and does not nip me in a vital part. But perchance it would be wisest never to put one's paw into it. Furniture. At present, our houses are cluttered and defiled with it, and a good housewife would sweep out the greater part into a dust hole and not leave her morning's work undone. Morning work. By the blushes of Aurora and the music of Memnon, what should be man's work in this world? I had 3 pieces of limestone on my desk, but I was terrified to find that they required to be dusted daily, when the furniture of my mind was all undusted still. So I threw them out the window in disgust. How then could I have a furnished house? I would rather sit in the open air, for no dust gathers on the grass, unless where man has broken ground. A lady once offered me a mat, but as I had no room to spare within the house, nor time to shake it, I declined, preferring to wipe my feet on the sod before the door. It is best to avoid the beginnings of evil. For more than 5 years, I maintained myself solely by the labor of my own hands, and I found that by working about 6 weeks in a year, I could meet all the expenses of living. The whole of my winters, as well as most of my summers, I had free and clear for study. I have thoroughly tried school-keeping and found that my expenses were in proportion, or rather out of proportion, to my income, for I was obliged to dress and train, not to say think and believe accordingly, and I lost my life in the bargain. I say, beware of all enterprises that require new clothes, and not rather a new wearer. As I did not teach for the good of my fellow men, but simply for a livelihood, that was a failure. Oh, I have tried trade, but I found that it would take 10 years to get underway in that, and that then I should probably be on my way to the devil. I was actually afraid that I might by that time be doing what is called good business. When formerly I was looking about to see what I could do for a living, I thought often and seriously of picking huckleberries. But surely I could do that, and its small profits might suffice, for my greatest skill has been to want but little. I also dreamed that I might gather the wild herbs or carry evergreens to such villagers as love to be reminded of the woods, even to the city by hay cart loads. But I have since learned that trade curses everything it handles. And though you trade in messages from heaven, the whole curse of trade attaches to the business. For myself, I found that the occupation of a day laborer was the most independent of any, especially as it required only 30 or 40 days in a year to support me. The laborer's day ends with the going down of the sun, and he is then free to devote himself to his chosen pursuit. In short, I am convinced, both by faith and experience, that to maintain one's self on this earth is not a hardship, but a pastime. If we will live simply and wisely, it is not necessary that a man should earn his living by the sweat of his brow, unless he sweats easier than I do. And I would not have anyone adopt my mode of living on any account. Besides that, before he has fairly learned it, I may have found another for myself. I desire that there should be as many different persons in the world as possible, but I would have each one be very careful to find out and to pursue his own way, and not his father's, or his mother's, or his neighbor's instead. But all this is very selfish, I heard some of my townsmen say. Now, I confess that I have hitherto indulged very little in philanthropic enterprises. And as for doing good, that is one of the professions which are full. Moreover, I've tried it fairly, and strange as it may seem, am satisfied that it does not agree with my constitution. But I would not stand between any man and his genius, and to him who does this work, which I decline, with his whole heart and soul and life, I'd say, persevere, even if the world calls it doing evil, as it most likely will. What good I do, in the common sense of the word, must be aside from my main path, and for the most part, wholly unintended. Men say practically, well, you begin where you are, and such as you are, without aiming mainly to become of more worth, and with kindness aforethought, go about doing good. If I were to preach at all in this strain, I should say rather, set about being good. There is no odor so bad as that which arises from goodness tainted. Or if I knew for certainty that a man was coming to my house with the conscious design of doing me good, I should run for my life. As from that dry and parching wind of the African deserts, which fills the mouth, the nose, and eyes with dust till you are suffocated. Now, I would not subtract anything from the praise that is due philanthropy, but merely demand justice for all who, by their lives and works, are a blessing to mankind. I want the flower and fruit of the man, that some fragrance be wafted over from him to me, and some ripe flavor our intercourse. His goodness must not be a partial and transitory act, but a constant superfluity, which costs him nothing and of which he is unconscious. This is the charity that hides a multitude of sins, and lets not our left hand know what our right hand is doing. If then we would restore mankind by some natural means, let us first be as simple and well as nature herself. Dispel the clouds which hang over our brows, and take up life into our very pores. Do not stay to be an overseer of the poor, but endeavor to become one of the worthies of this world. I left the woods for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare any more time for that one. It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves. Well, I had not lived there a week before my feet wore a path from my door to the pond side, and though it has been only a year since I trod it, it is still quite distinct. The surface of the earth is soft and impressible by the feet of men, and so with the paths which the mind travels. How worn and dusty, then, must be the highways of the world, how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. I do not wish to take a cabin passage, but rather to go before the mast and out on the deck of the world, for there I could best see the moonlight amid the mountains. I do not wish to go below now. And I learned this by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life that he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind him and pass an invisible boundary with the license of a higher order of things. In proportion as he simplifies his life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex, and solitude will not be solitude, nor poverty, poverty, nor weakness, weakness. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations underneath them. Thank you.